The harsh sound of my phone shattered the quiet in my small flat in Notting Hill when I woke up in the middle of the night. 3:12 a.m. When I saw the caller ID, my pulse raced. Savannah! At this hour, my sister never phoned. Sis Madison. She sounded choppy and tremulous, as if she were suppressing a panic attack. It's Dad. A heart attack struck him. A serious one. Moreover, an hour ago, they hurried him to St. Luke's. He might not make it, the doctor said. I went cold. Is he awake? Did they say anything more? Turning on the lamp and grabbing my coat, I asked. Sniffling, Savannah answered the phone. They don't know. However, he asked for you before he fainted. Madison, he wants to see you. Hanging up is not something I recall. My body did what it was supposed to. I opened my laptop, packed my clothing in a suitcase, and attempted to make an airline reservation. I had to input my information 3 times since my hands were trembling so much. The economy was completely sold out. I decided on a one-way ticket to New York in business class. What I had saved over the previous 2 years was all but destroyed by the expense, but I could not care less. My father was now lying in a hospital bed, shouting my name with what may have been his final breath. He was the one who stood in the audience supporting me at my first fashion show, the one who made me eat breakfast every morning merely to sigh and say, "Fashion's a hobby, not a career." I had to go. My drawings for the spring collection that will make its London Fashion Week debut were left behind. After battling my way up in this brutal profession for 3 years, establishing relationships and trust, I was ready to risk everything with a single call. At 6 a.m, I went to the studio to talk to our creative director, Karina, who had repeatedly talked me out of resigning. She scowled at the luggage in my hand as she looked up from evaluating some outfits adorned with crystals. What's happening, Madison? I had trouble speaking. My father suffered a heart attack. I had to take a plane to New York immediately. After setting down her pen, Karina became silent for a short while. Madison, the collection launches in less than a week, she added softly after that. The lead is you. If you depart right now. I understand. I cut in, my eyes tearing. I might lose everything. Karina looked at me for a long time before letting out a sigh. Family is family. However, time will not wait for you. I tried not to weep as I nodded. I appreciate everything you've done. I felt heavy as I walked out of the studio. I had attempted to phone the hospital when I was waiting at Heathrow. Each time, they informed me that no Douglas Harper patient had been hospitalized. I attributed it to a mix-up or confusion, or perhaps they had moved him. I was unable to fall asleep during the 8-hour journey. My thoughts were racing. Will I arrive in time? Would he be conscious at all? Had I gone away from my family for too long to understand what was important? It was still dark at JFK when the jet touched down. In the hopes of receiving a message from Savannah, I switched on my phone. I only received the response, "Are you here yet?" At the gate is Eric, my cousin Eric, who nearly got into a fight with Dad over a business issue. Upon exiting baggage claim, I noticed him standing there, looking serious. No urgency, no tears. I hurried over to him. "How is Dad doing, Eric?" "Where is he?" "Well," he replied slowly after blinking, "there are a few things you should know." I froze. A shiver went through my body. "What are you saying?" "Eric, don't be evasive." He looked away from me. "We should speak in the automobile. Before you visit the hospital, Mom wants you to recuperate at home." I stared him down. "No, I want to go to the hospital right now." Eric looked uneasy. "Madison, you need to stay calm." I didn't listen. I couldn't. Each step toward the parking lot felt heavier. If Dad was really critical, washing my face or grabbing a snack couldn't possibly be the priority. We rode in silence to St. Luke's. Outside the window, Manhattan was still asleep under the gray dawn. Inside the car, the air was thick. Eric said nothing more. I stared at my phone, heart sinking with every missed call from Savannah. When we reached the hospital, I opened the door before the car even stopped. I marched into the ER lobby and straight to the front desk. "Excuse me, I'm looking for a patient." "Douglas Harper. He was brought in last night with a heart attack." "I'm his daughter." The nurse frowned and started typing. "Can you repeat the name?" "Douglas Harper." "Around 1 a.m. I'm Madison Harper, his daughter." She kept typing. Time felt frozen. I could hear my own heartbeat. "I'm sorry," she said gently but firmly. No one by that name has been admitted in the past 48 hours. I blinked. Can you check again? Maybe he was transferred to another department, cardiology. She turned to another nurse, exchanged a few words, got a shake of the head. Then she looked back at me. I'm certain. There is no Douglas Harper here. Not in ER, not in inpatient records. I stepped back as if the floor had cracked open beneath me. I turned to Eric, who stood a few feet away, avoiding my eyes. Eric, I said through clenched teeth. Explain. Where is my father? He stepped forward, voice low, trying to sound calm. Madison, maybe it's a system error. Or he was moved to a private clinic. Mom thought it'd be better for you to come home first. I shook my head. I'm not leaving until I know exactly where he is. Eric reached for my elbow, but I pulled away. Don't touch me unless you're going to tell me the truth. His eyes darted. Then he sighed. Okay. The truth is, he's not here. He didn't have a heart attack. It was just a minor scare. Nothing serious. My body felt like it crumpled inside. What are you saying? Let me explain. Eric rushed in. We just wanted you back. The family needs you. There are some things we couldn't discuss over the phone. I backed away completely, flooded with a storm of emotion. Shock, rage, betrayal. I couldn't believe they'd made up such a story. Play with my emotions. Preyed on my deepest fear of losing him. Do you realize what I gave up? I said, my voice shaking with fury, not weakness. I walked away from my career. From my future. I thought my father was dying. Eric stayed silent, eyes fixed on the tiled floor, shoulders slack. I stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out of the hospital, heart pounding with fury. Not just because they lied, but because I knew one thing for sure. They wanted me back. And whatever the reason was, it wasn't simple. On the way home, I texted Savannah. Dad's fine. What about you? Did you know about this from the start? No reply. The car slowly turned onto the old street where my childhood home sat nestled among maple trees. Everything looked strangely peaceful, but I knew behind that door a performance was already underway. When I stepped into the foyer, the first thing I saw was my mother wearing a silk coat, her face perfectly made up, as if she were headed to a gala, not coming off a sleepless night worrying about her husband. Madison, she smiled as though nothing had happened. You're finally home. Everyone's in the dining room. I stood frozen. A chill crept down my spine. I was back, but not for love. I had just walked straight into a carefully crafted trap. The house was thick with the scent of peonies, the perfume my mother used only on special occasions, usually lavish family gatherings. But today there was no party, no guests. Just family, and a setup I couldn't yet see. She led me into the dining room where the table was so absurdly prepared it felt theatrical. Hand-embroidered tablecloth, the fine Wedgwood china reserved for Thanksgiving. And in the center, a plate of almond waffles, my childhood favorite, though I'd stopped eating them when I was 19. Sit down, sweetheart, my mother said, patting my shoulder. You must be tired after such a long flight. I didn't answer. I glanced across the table where my father sat, holding a cup of hot tea like everything was fine. The man I believed was on the verge of death now looked healthier than ever, rosy complexion, clean SH. ChatGPT said. Avon, sharp eyes still full of that cold, calculated confidence. Dad, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm really glad to see you well. Truly, he said, setting his cup down and leaning forward, eyes locked on mine. Madison, I know you're angry, but let's speak as a family. We need you. All of us need you. I looked around. Besides my mother and father, Eric, the one who had picked me up, was there, and so was Savannah, my sister, her head bowed, avoiding my gaze. The room felt like a closed courtroom, and I knew I was on trial. Fine, I said, taking a seat. Then let's be honest. Why did you fake a heart attack just to get me here? Don't tell me it was just family love. My father chuckled softly. You've always been direct. No, not just love. It's about an opportunity. A future you could help preserve. I stared at him. An opportunity? You mean Grandpa's inheritance? My mother stiffened. Eric looked away. Savannah raised her teary eyes. We weren't going to keep it from you much longer, my mother rushed to say. But you know, your 30th birthday is in less than a month, and according to the will, you'll receive the entire amount. $8 million, I interrupted. $8.3 million, including the investment portfolio and the Vermont property. Silence. You knew? My mother asked, stunned. Of course, I replied coolly. Grandpa was the only one who ever respected my choices. He told me everything before he passed. That I'd get my share when I turned 30, with one condition. I stay out of the family business. My father's face darkened. A ridiculous condition. No, I said. He knew exactly what this family would try to do without protection. Eric stood abruptly. You can't just stand by while your family collapses. Where do you think that money came from? From our parents' blood and sweat over 40 years. Blood and sweat. I snapped. Or shady investment loans, unfinished construction contracts, or the investors you all made promises to and then disappeared on. Madison, that's enough, my father said firmly. This isn't an interrogation. We just want you to join the company as a partner. As family. I leaned in, eyes locked on his. Not a partner. You want me to transfer all the money into Walker Holdings to cover your losses. And what do I get in return? A powerless seat on the board? An empty promise that we'll stick together? Savannah broke down. I'm sorry, sis. I didn't know they'd do this. I thought it was a joke, a way to bring you home. I didn't think. I looked at her, my heart softening for a moment. But then I turned to my father. You might think I'm the irresponsible daughter chasing a silly dream, but at least I don't deceive people who trust me. And I won't let Grandpa's money be used to cover your mess. My father stood, fists clenched. But his voice stayed even. Madison, if you walk away, the consequences won't just be financial. Are you ready to handle that? I drew a deep breath, feeling the tension that had clung to my shoulders since London. I've lost a lot just by coming back, I said slowly. But if I have to lose more to do what's right, I will. And this time, I'll be the one holding the cards. The room fell silent. I stood up, pulled out my phone, and looked him straight in the eye. Now we're playing by my rules. I walked back to my old bedroom in silence, closing the door behind me like shutting out every lingering sound from downstairs. Everything was just as I'd left it. The faded seagull wallpaper, the old oak bookshelf, and the desk where I once sketched my first designs using HB pencils borrowed from Savannah's crayon box. I sat on the edge of the bed, gripping my phone. My heart raced, not from fear but from memory. The years of being the family's thorn came rushing back like an undertow. Quiet, but all-consuming. It was never the daughter they wanted. When I got into Parsons School of Design, Dad didn't even show up for my first showcase. Design is frivolous, he once said over a cold dinner. You should study asset management like Eric. Practical, stable, valued. That line haunted me for years. Not because he disapproved, but because he never once asked what I wanted. I was born to inherit an empire, whether I liked it or not. And when I chose a different path, they didn't see bravery, they saw betrayal. Mom was subtler. She didn't voice disapproval directly, but on the day I launched my first collection, she sent me an email. No congratulations, just a link to an article on high unemployment rates in the fashion industry post-pandemic. I remember deleting it without finishing. They never wanted me to be a designer. They wanted me to be part of Walker Legacy, the name plastered on every real estate banner in the region, from the upscale Riverstone apartments to the suburban malls in Fairfield. They wanted me in a blazer, in a boardroom, signing contracts and nodding along. But I chose fabric over finance, the runway over spreadsheets. I chose to build my world, not color in theirs. And they've never forgiven me for it. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Be careful what they're hiding. Trust no one but yourself. I stared at the screen. No name, no signature. But I had a distinct feeling that someone in the shadows was watching and maybe trying to help. I saved the number without replying, then stood and opened the old wooden wardrobe. I pulled out the bottom drawer where I kept a worn sea blue tin box. Inside were scraps I once hid from my parents, my first wedding dress sketch at 16, the acceptance letter from Parsons, a photo from my first dress rehearsal in London, and a letter, a faded envelope with firm handwriting, to Madison from Grandpa. I'd nearly forgotten it. He gave me the letter during our final visit at the care home in Vermont, where he spent his final years after stepping away from the company just to breathe clean air one last time. Before I go, I opened it, heart pounding. Madison, If you're reading this letter, chances are you've been pulled into something I always feared might happen. I can't stop our family from making mistakes, but I can protect a piece of your freedom. That's why I set up the inheritance the way I did. You're the only one in our bloodline brave enough to say no. Don't lose that. And if anyone tries to control you, remember, blood is not a chain. Integrity is what you must hold on to. I always believed in you. Grandpa Kev. I sat frozen. The letter wasn't just advice. It was a map. He knew years ago he saw this coming. That one day they try to take back everything I once walked away from. A soft knock at the door. I tucked the letter away and turned to see Savannah standing in the doorway, eyes red and swollen. Medicine. I didn't know it would turn out like this. They said if you just came back, things would be worked out. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wardrobe. Worked out by making me hand over the inheritance. Savannah lowered her head. I overheard them last night. They planned to list you as an investment trustee, but Dad and Eric would retain full control. I took a deep breath. Thanks for telling me. She stepped closer and whispered, There's one more thing. I saw Bernard, the family lawyer, here a few times recently. They said it was for consultation, but I think something's off. I overheard him on the phone. He mentioned moving the funds before your birthday, against the will's terms. It clicked. They had no intention of waiting for my consent. They were planning a workaround. I left the house the next morning before anyone woke up. The sky hadn't lightened yet, and fog still draped over the maple trees, lining the familiar white fence, but I wasn't in a nostalgic mood. I only knew I needed the truth, and I would find it no matter who tried to hide it. I headed straight to the little coffee shop on Cortlandt Street, where I'd worked part-time in high school. Irene, the owner, still remembered me. Madison Harper. Ma, you look like someone out of a fashion magazine, she chuckled, handing me a latte. What brings you back? I heard your dad had a heart attack. I sipped. There was no heart attack, Irene. Just a fake phone call to drag me home. Her face paled. She lowered her voice, leaning across the counter. Madison, if you really want to know what's going on, talk to Kent. He used to do the books for your dad's company, but he left a few months ago for personal reasons. The name Kent made my stomach twist. I remembered meeting him at a few of the company's Christmas parties. Quiet office number. She nodded, pulling out a faded scrap of paper from the drawer. I thanked her, left the shop, and called immediately. We met at a bakery near the train station. Kent showed up right on time, wearing a checkered shirt and black-rimmed glasses. Still the same accountant, but his eyes looked tired. Wary Madison, he nodded. I assume you want to know the real state of Walker Holdings. I nodded. I know they're trying to use my inheritance. What I don't know is why they're that desperate. Kent sighed, pulled out his phone, and opened a series of spreadsheets. The company expanded too fast in the past 2 years. Gateway Plaza was stalled due to permit issues. Medawine Estates got sued over structural faults. What's left are loans from unconventional sources. He frowned. Unconventional? How? Private investors off the books. Some tied to shell companies. High interest terms. Vague clauses. If they miss repayment, the consequences won't just be financial. I sat up. You mean criminal risk? Madison, Kent said slowly. Walker Holdings is running like a Ponzi scheme. They're using new investor money to pay old investor returns. There's no actual profit from projects. Most are stalled or worse, frozen. A chill ran through me. It was all clear now. They didn't just need my money to save the company. They needed me to cover a crumbling con. And if I don't sign over the inheritance, they can't touch the money. Kent confirmed. I've seen a copy of your grandfather's trust clause. It's airtight. You're the only one authorized to release funds, but he hesitated. I know Bernard, the lawyer, is working on a back door. They're pressuring you to voluntarily invest, but if that fails, they might forge your signature, or worse, declare you legally unfit to manage your assets. My breath caught. They go that far? Madison, they already faked a heart attack. Nothing's too far anymore. I left the bakery with a weight in my chest. Each step on the sidewalk felt like I was walking across the cracking foundation of my family. Dad, the same man who once carried me home after I crashed my bike at 7, was now plotting to steal my future to preserve his perfect businessman mask. Mom, the one who used to brush my hair before every high school presentation, now sat across from a lawyer, plotting how to force my hand. And Eric, my brother. When did he become the man knocking on my door at night asking for a signature? I pulled out my phone and messaged the one person I could still trust, Julian, my ex, now a state-level financial crimes investigator. I need to meet. It's about investment fraud and asset transfers. Urgent. I didn't know exactly what I was stepping into, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just a family matter anymore. This was large-scale fraud. I met Julian that afternoon at a discreet cafe in Stamford, far from town and even farther from anyone tied to my family. He was the same Farah. Calm, sharp, amber eyes, hard to read. Long time, he said, pulling out an earbud and closing his laptop. I'm guessing this isn't just a coffee and catch-up situation. I sat down, straight to the point. I need help and I need to know I can trust you. Julian tilted his head. If you're asking, it means you don't trust anyone else. So tell me. From the beginning, I told him everything. The midnight call, the empty hospital, the staged dinner, the numbers Ken showed me. I held nothing back. If I wanted him in, he needed the full puzzle. He listened quietly the whole time, nodding occasionally, asking the right questions. When I finished, he looked at me steadily. Do you have any physical evidence yet? Emails, documents, calls, contracts, meeting minutes. Not yet, but I have a plan, I said. I'll get into the company's internal system using Savannah's subaccount. She has access to financial reports. Ken still has old files. I just need to know if I get enough. Can you take it to the right people? Julian nodded. State Finance Department, Securities Commission, and the Attorney General's office. If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, this isn't just fraud. This is a federal crime. And if they try to force me to sign before my birthday, don't sign anything. I'll get a lawyer involved, Julian said. What about your grandfather? Did he have a lawyer before he passed? Yes. His name was Joseph Reed. He was Grandpa's close friend, specialized in estate law. Julian jotted it down. Find him. If he set up the trust, he'll know every clause and how to block any illegal transfer. That night, when I returned home, I slipped into character. I smiled politely at dinner, asked Dad about the new development project, feigned interest in the suburban expansion he bragged about. My mother watched me with an expression that said she wasn't sure whether to believe in this calm or brace for a storm. I pretended to be tired and asked to turn in early, but really I was waiting. At 11 p.m., I knocked softly on Savannah's door. She startled when she saw me, but opened the door. Your account still has access to Walker Holdings' internal network, right? Savannah hesitated. What are you planning to do? Find the truth. If you really want to be on the right side, she sighed and nodded. I can let you in, but only tonight. It is updating the access system tomorrow. I borrowed Savannah's laptop and logged into the system using her credentials. Internal folders appeared, hundreds of files. But I knew exactly what I needed. Balance sheets, investment records, and most importantly, loan contracts with suspicious clauses. I downloaded everything onto an external drive and took screenshots of any irregularities. Some contracts contained vague provisions, many with consulting advance payments sent to untraceable accounts. There was even a payroll sheet for development advisors I'd never heard of. And then a hidden folder labeled Archangel Funding. When I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. A loan contract with an investment firm in the Bahamas. 18% interest. Full repayment required within 90 days. Signed under the name Madison Harper with a forged signature. Below it, a scanned copy of my passport, also fake. I looked at Savannah. Her face had gone pale. You didn't sign these, right? Of course not. I quickly copied everything and encrypted the drive, then sent it back up to Julian that same night. When I closed the laptop, my heart was pounding. Not from fear of being caught, but because I knew I was closer than ever to the eye of the storm. The next morning, Julian called. I've gone through everything. We have enough to begin the investigation. But Madison, you need to be careful. If they realize what you've got, they won't hide anymore. 3 days later, I walked into the office of Joseph Reed, my grandfather's estate attorney, inside a historic building in New Haven's Old Quarter. He was over 70, silver-haired with sharp eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He recognized me immediately. "Madison Harper, I was hoping you'd come ever since Calvin passed." I nodded and handed him the drive. "I need you to verify the legal integrity of every clause in Calvin's inheritance trust. And I need to know, can they fake anything to transfer the assets?" Joseph spent nearly an hour reviewing everything, including the documents Ken had compiled, the fake contracts, and the Archangel funding folder. When he looked up, his expression was serious. "They're dangerously close to the line, and some have already crossed it," he said. "You did the right thing by not signing anything. If you had, all protections would have been void. So what do I do now?" "You're going to do exactly what Calvin intended," Joseph replied, pulling a thick folder from his drawer. "This is a formal petition from the beneficiary requesting a civil and criminal investigation for violations of the trust, financial fraud, and document forgery. I've kept it for over 3 years, waiting for the day you were ready to sign." I picked up the pen without hesitation. Today is that day. Less than a week later, Julian informed me. The SEC had received the initial file along with evidence from Joseph. In the weeks that followed, the investigation spread wider than I ever imagined. The SEC issued an asset freeze against Walker Holdings and moved to seal all accounts linked to Bernard, the family lawyer, who was now under suspicion for document forgery. Julian helped me work with the state legal team to ensure my rights as the lawful beneficiary. Complaints poured in from investors, some of whom had been family friends, people I once called uncle or aunt, now looking at me with both sadness and gratitude. I created a heavily secured online archive to store all evidence, emails, and recorded calls. Connecticut is a one-party consent state, and I took full advantage, recording every recent conversation with my father, Eric, and Bernard. Every time they mentioned a backup plan or forcing Madison into a contract, I captured every word. Life in the house felt like walking on thin ice. No one spoke loudly. No one made eye contact. I spent my days quietly observing, counting the hours until the truth came to light. 3 months after the warrant was executed, the first trial began at the Fairfield District Court. Outside, press crowded the gates. Cameras pointed at the once prestigious estate, now the center of Connecticut's largest financial scandal in over a decade. I sat in the back row with Julian and Joseph Reed, my partners. Through every legal step, on the defendant's bench sat my father in a beige prison jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, his expression still clinging to pride. My mother, pale, hair neatly pinned but visibly hollow, sat silently beside him. Eric was different. He couldn't hide his agitation, occasionally glancing back at me like he wanted to blame me for everything. Savannah wasn't in court that day. After voluntarily giving a statement and providing proof that she was coerced into assisting through her account access, she was granted immunity. But I knew choosing truth had cost her family's trust. The prosecutor laid out the charges: financial fraud, money laundering, misuse of investment funds, and forgery of estate documents. One by one, the evidence was presented. Internal emails, illegal loan agreements, financial data restored by Kent, and most importantly, the forged documents with my signature along with the recordings I had secretly made. My father stayed mostly silent, speaking only when directly addressed. My mother cried as the prosecutor read aloud emails she had sent to Bernard where she wrote about softening Madison up through emotional pressure. Eric lost it on the 3rd day, slamming the table mid-hearing and getting escorted out of the courtroom temporarily. But the biggest surprise came from Bernard, the family attorney who once seemed so polished at Christmas parties. Faced with undeniable evidence, he chose to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. In his testimony, he revealed everything: how he helped Eric set up shell companies, how my father transferred money into offshore investment funds in the Caribbean, and how my mother used a charitable foundation to launder funds. The trial lasted 5 weeks. On sentencing day, the courtroom was completely still. The judge delivered the verdict, his voice firm and resolute. Douglas Harper, as the mastermind, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison with no chance of early release, along with a civil penalty exceeding $5 million. Rachel Harper, my mother, received a 5-year suspended sentence with supervision due to limited cooperation and not directly managing the funds, though she benefited from them. Eric Harper, my brother, was sentenced to 12 years in prison on charges of fraud and forgery. Bernard had his law license permanently revoked, received a 4-year prison sentence, and was ordered to compensate victims using all of his personal assets. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt relieved. Justice, delayed as it was, had finally arrived. In the courthouse hallway, some of the defrauded investors began approaching me. An elderly woman with silver hair took my hand, her voice trembling. "You saved us," she said, tears spilling over. "We won't recover everything, but at least the truth didn't stay buried." I nodded, speechless. That afternoon, I returned to the old house, now partially sealed off for asset investigation. I stood at the window of my childhood room, looking out into the yard. The same maple tree was still there, rustling in the autumn breeze, but the Madison who once stood beneath it, dreaming of belonging, no longer existed. I got into the car where Julian was waiting. He looked at me, but didn't ask anything. We simply drove away from that old road, carrying with us a chapter that had finally closed. Painful but necessary. A week later, I received a handwritten letter from Savannah. Her handwriting was shaky. "Dear Madison, I know we've lost a lot to do what's right, but I believe you did what no one else had the courage to do. I'm starting over, and if you'll allow me, I hope one day we can start over together. Savannah." I folded the letter and placed it beside the files for the Victim Support Fund that Joseph and I were setting up. A portion of my inheritance would go toward compensating those who'd been deceived. Not out of obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. Eventually, I looked in the mirror of my new apartment in New York, a space where I was building a different life. The woman staring back wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. The following spring, I officially completed the legal conversion of Walker Holdings' remaining assets into a new entity, the Harper Foundation for Ethical Development, a nonprofit dedicated to rebuilding communities harmed by abandoned projects, shady investments, and especially the fallout caused by my own family's company. What used to be my father's executive office on the 5th floor of the Central Stanford building was now a light-filled collaborative space covered in community planning maps, affordable housing blueprints, and restoration project timelines. I kept the old oak desk, but removed every symbol of past power. No gold plaques, no photos of my father shaking hands with politicians. Just one frame remained. My grandfather, Calvin Harper, smiling by the wooden window of his old house in Vermont. In the picture of his hand, with support from Joseph Reed and a team of young lawyers from Columbia, I established the Community Restitution Fund using more than 60% of my remaining inheritance. Those defrauded by Walker Holdings, from retirees who lost pensions to unpaid contractors, were invited to submit claims. Within 3 months, we approved over 120 cases, offering compensation for up to 70% of their original losses. Julian helped me connect with federal agencies and Connecticut state government to secure additional funding, turning the Harper Foundation into a pilot model for other states focused on post-fraud economic recovery. Savannah, after undergoing therapy and cutting ties with Eric, became the foundation's director of communications. No one expected the girl who once helped stage the lie to become the voice behind speeches that moved hearts and told the stories of those hurt by greed. A day during a project meeting for the Affordable Housing Initiative in Bridgeport, I received a small package. Inside was an old wedding dress sketch, the original one I had drawn at 17 and thought I had lost. Alongside it was a handwritten note, "This belongs to you. Keep creating something beautiful, Mom." I didn't know who she had asked to send it. After the trial, my mother served her probation quietly in a small town in Maine. We hadn't spoken since, but that sketch, with faded lines still intact, tightened something in my chest. Maybe in the rubble of everything that had broken, small pieces of forgiveness still remained. Not enough to rebuild, but enough to soften. Every week I spent one afternoon with a group of high school students in the first relocation complex we had finished. The kids called me Model Madison because I used to work in fashion. They loved telling me about their redesigns of the world. A bridge that lights up when someone feels sad, a hanging park between 2 old buildings, a library that only opens at night for insomniacs seeking peace. And I listened. Not to spark inspiration for a new collection, but to remember why I started this journey. Not to prove myself to anyone, but to build a place where no one is left behind because of someone else's mistakes. I also started writing essays about justice, trust, and how a woman, once seen as the family rebel, could rebuild the moral foundation of an entire community. My pieces were published in outlets like Forbes, Harvard Ethics Review, and even Vogue. I remember when the Vogue editor reached out. "We want to feature you not just because of fashion, but because you've redefined what elegance means, from fabric to social responsibility." 3 years later, I stood in front of the new headquarters of the Harper Foundation, a building repurposed from one of Walker Holdings' abandoned projects, now home to a vocational center, a community library, and an entrepreneurship hub for young women. I cut the ribbon to applause, not from elites, but from people who had once lost everything and were now beginning again. I looked up at the sign. Rebuilding isn't just about building back. It's about building right from the start. One October afternoon, I visited the Women's Correctional Facility in York, Connecticut. My mother had agreed to serve an 18-month sentence after being discovered assisting my father in hiding illicit funds. She had been transferred there over 6 months ago. But this was the first time I had requested a visit. The visitation room wasn't what I expected. No thick bars or gray walls, just a simple space with plastic chairs. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker, and I didn't enjoy exposing old scars to strangers. But then I realized if my story could help even one person find courage in their darkest moment, it was worth telling. Standing before a warmly lit hall filled with hundreds of eyes, I didn't begin with fancy terminology or complex graphs. I started with a simple sentence. Sometimes you have to choose between protecting your family's reputation or protecting your own conscience. I spoke about the 3 a.m. phone call, the fake heart attack, the collapse of trust, and the unbearable loneliness of realizing the people who should have protected me were the ones who hurt me most. I didn't share to accuse, but to make clear, silence does more damage than the truth ever will. Afterward, a middle-aged woman approached me. She was the director of a fund supporting victims of familial financial abuse. "You're not alone," she said, holding my hand. "Your voice speaks for thousands who aren't yet strong enough to use theirs. I once believed blood was sacred, unbreakable. That family, even when wrong, should be forgiven. But I've learned a painful truth. Betrayal from loved ones isn't lighter. It's heavier, precisely because it comes from those we once thought safest. Family isn't built on DNA. It's built on choice, on choosing love, respect, and honesty. Each day, I chose what was right, even at the cost of what once felt irreplaceable. I lost my father, my brother, and the image of a mother I once longed to impress. But I gained a new family, honest colleagues, communities rebuilt from ashes, and a sister who once strayed but now helps me shape the future. Savannah joined me with 2 mugs of hot chocolate one late afternoon as we were standing on the Harper Foundation rooftop installing solar panels for the upcoming expansion. Her voice was as soft as the air when she questioned, "Do you think Dad ever regretted it?" After a while, I said, "I'm not sure, but I think if he did, it came too late for it to matter." I was staring out at the fiery crimson sunset. Savannah's eyes were tired but not lost as she nodded. Both she and I had emerged from that shade. We all have the opportunity to make a different decision, even if none of us are flawless. I continued to write. My writings have been included into university courses on moral leadership. I judged a startup competition for young Black entrepreneurs as an honorary judge. People I had never met wrote to me to tell me how my tale had given them the confidence to flee emotional abuse, deceit, or control from their own families. I also understood when a teenage girl from Chicago wrote to me one peaceful evening to say that she had refused to sign an unjust inheritance contract since Madison had done so too. It was never all about me on my trip. It served as a reminder that doing the right thing is never simple, but is always worthwhile. And I will protect it by myself if necessary. Calmly, without remorse, and with pride. Madison's tale serves as a potent warning that treachery cannot be excused by blood. Even at considerable personal expense, she made the correct decision when confronted with dishonesty from people she had previously trusted the most. She reminds us that honesty never goes out of style in a society when compromise is the norm. It takes more than just bravery to stand up and say no to wrongdoing. That's how we recover our value. And sometimes the only way to avoid falling is to stand by yourself.